Don't worry, I've already decided about Dad's inheritance. I'm taking the money, and you can have that abandoned house. After our father passed away, my brother Paul arbitrarily distributed the inheritance. Moreover, my sister-in-law also taunted me with a full-faced grin. You should be thankful even for a haunted house. That house looks like it could collapse at any moment. If you don't demolish it soon, we'll get complaints from the neighbors. I felt anger rising within me as she referred to our family home as a haunted house. Reluctantly, I was cleaning the wildly neglected house when I opened a safe in my father's room and found something unexpected inside. My name is Ashley, a 36-year-old office worker living with my husband and son. Balancing work and raising my 5-year-old son is tough. But with my husband helping with housework and childcare, I've managed to persevere. Until 3 years ago. My mother was healthy and would sometimes help by picking up my son from daycare. My mother, who lived with my father in our nearby family home, had been taking care of my son until she suddenly passed away unexpectedly. My father had been unwell and receiving medical treatment, so I had never imagined my mother would pass away first. I'm sorry for making you suffer through taking care of me. Before the funeral, he said that through tears. Hearing my father's words, I also reflected on having relied on my mother to take care of my son. And my husband comforted me. It's not your fault or your father's. Your mother seemed happy taking care of everyone. She must have been satisfied. Even with what my husband said, I couldn't accept it immediately. The sudden loss of my mother was a great shock to both my father and me. And we were unable to think of anything else, so my husband took care of the funeral arrangements. My brother Paul, however, acted as if it was someone else's problem even after our mother's death. I'm not going to be the chief mourner. I've never done a funeral before, so Ashley, you guys handle it. As the eldest son, my brother should have been preparing for the funeral. But he said this with a look of annoyance. I had hoped that he would step up for our mother's funeral, but that hope was in vain. Thanks to my husband, the funeral went smoothly, but by then, Paul had disappeared. Paul is such a disappointment. She can't rest peacefully in heaven. When my father said that with a sigh, I agreed with him. The funeral was over. And I was contemplating discussing our father's future living arrangements with Paul. Worried about leaving my father alone due to his poor health, I considered having him live with us. Just as I was about to contact Paul, he and his wife showed up at the family home. Let's talk about Mom's inheritance. As the eldest son, I can decide, right? As he started to say arbitrary things, my sister-in-law continued with a smirk. I'll take this house, but I won't take care of your father. I was furious that my sister-in-law, who hadn't even shown up for the funeral, was interfering in the inheritance. You didn't even attend the funeral. You must have been very busy, huh? Even as I spoke sarcastically, she pretended not to hear. The atmosphere turned tense as Paul and his wife appeared. And my father, with a look of dismay, said, "This house is in my name, so it's not part of the inheritance. Your mom's assets are just some savings, so let's distribute them as planned." I hadn't cared much about my mother's assets, but as he said, there were only a few savings. My brother and his wife, unable to believe his words, searched around the family home. What's inside this safe? There might be gold bars. Pointing at the old safe in my father's room, my brother yelled. The safe had been there since I was little, and I had never seen inside it. There's no key for that safe, so it can't be opened. Besides, who would put valuables in such a small safe? As he said, since the safe isn't that big, there's a risk that a thief could steal it along with everything inside. Despite Paul's quick resignation, my sister-in-law seemed curious about what was inside. If there's no key, why don't we just call a locksmith to open it? Even though it's small, it might contain something like a passbook. Hearing this, Paul seemed hesitant, but my father retorted in exasperation. You can hire a locksmith if you want, but you'll have to pay the fee yourselves. I believe it only contains some documents. Hearing that, it seemed like too much trouble for Paul and his wife. Just then, I remembered that my mother had given me a key when I was young. I wasn't sure if that was for this safe, but she had mentioned keeping that with me. Paul had never seen the safe opened and assumed it unlikely to contain valuables. He figured that since my mother's passbooks and insurance documents were stored elsewhere, there wouldn't be anything else of importance. It's a waste of money to pay a high fee for worthless documents. Get rid of that confusing safe. As Paul spoke in frustration, his wife agreed. We divided my mother's estate according to the law. But Paul and his wife seemed dissatisfied with the small amount. My sister-in-law, not even an heir, kept complaining until the end. Once the inheritance discussion was over, Paul appeared indifferent about my father's future. So I told him I would take our father home. You take care of Dad. Just don't monopolize his assets. I was surprised by my brother's focus only on the assets, and then my sister-in-law chimed in. Exactly. Your father was a company executive, so he must have substantial assets. I was annoyed by her interference in the unrelated matter of my father's inheritance. True, my father had been a senior executive at a large company and probably had significant assets. Unlike my mother, but I didn't care about the inheritance. What worried me was my increasingly frail father, especially after my mother's sudden death. But it seemed like Paul and his wife only cared about the inheritance. I was relieved and happy that my husband agreed to have my father live with us. My father soon moved in with our family. And we decided against moving into the old family home because it was in poor condition. Empty father started to recover gradually, enjoying his time with his grandson. He continued his medical visits, and his health didn't deteriorate much, which reassured both my husband and me. With my father living with us, we stopped going to the family home, which became worryingly neglected. Should we consider selling the family home? The building is no longer usable, right? My husband agreed, so we discussed selling it with my father. He was also concerned about the deteriorating state of the home and contacted a real estate agent right away. However, Paul and his wife suddenly showed up at our house, causing a commotion. That family home will be mine in the future, so don't dispose of it without my consent. His wife shouted threateningly. Don't let Ashley trick you into selling it. My father and I were surprised by their complaints since we hadn't anticipated them. When my father suggested transferring the home to Paul as is, his wife objected even more. Who would want that abandoned house? It's just trouble. Plus, there'd be gift tax, so we'll wait until you pass. What we want is a clean, single-family home. Ashley, can you clean it? And also renovate it while you're at it. The building may be dilapidated, but the land can be effectively utilized. My sister-in-law had done her research and even discussed tax implications. It was possible to dispose of my father's land and building despite their objections. But we stopped the sale due to their persistent arguments, with the vacant property issue becoming a nuisance. My husband and I decided to at least maintain the yard to avoid troubling the neighbors. However, the building itself did turn into a ruin. Not realizing how quickly a house could deteriorate when uninhabited, my father and us were shocked. We had removed any valuables from the home, but the unopened safe in my father's room remained. Was there really nothing important in that safe? When I asked, my father also admitted he wasn't sure what was inside. Your mother had the key, but she never seemed to use it. Hearing this, I became convinced that the key my mother had given me was indeed for that safe. Since moving in with us, my father had been more energetic than before. But he had caught a cold a while back, perhaps due to letting his guard down. Initially, my father thought he would recover quickly. But he didn't improve and eventually had to be hospitalized. Thinking Paul would be concerned, I informed him, and he came to the hospital with his wife. Tell us about the inheritance while you're still conscious. Dad, you must have various assets besides the family home, right? As Paul abruptly started talking about the inheritance, I was about to object when his wife yelled at me. You and your family aren't secretly taking Dad's money, are you? Just because you live together doesn't mean you can cheat. Their focus on money rather than my father's health infuriated me. My father, still conscious, tried to calm them down, but they weren't really listening. Throughout their visits to the hospital, Paul and his wife kept checking how much wealth there was. So my father eventually gave up and disclosed details. Once they knew how much my father had, Paul and his wife were delighted and then stopped showing up. Angry at my brother's heartlessness, I overheard my father muttering. When they're so happy about it, it becomes hard to tell the real story. When I questioned my father, he did not respond. After a while, my father's condition became critical. And when I contacted Paul, he said something appalling. Is Dad finally going to kick the bucket? I've got lots of preparations, so I'll leave the rest to you. His voice carried an unsettling cheerfulness. I was about to argue, but he abruptly ended the call. His attitude, seemingly waiting for our father to pass away, almost made me explode with anger. Regretting that I had informed Paul, I prayed for my father's recovery. But sadly, my prayers were not answered. I didn't want to talk to Paul, so I had my husband contact him instead. You can handle everything else. Dad said it's fine. I'm busy with the inheritance, so you guys take care of the funeral. Paul seemed cheerful when he talked to my husband. Normally calm, my husband was visibly upset and told me about it. I hadn't expected much from Paul and his wife since they hadn't been helpful during my mother's funeral. But it was hard to forgive their preoccupation with the inheritance. Thanks to my husband, we managed to carry out my father's funeral smoothly, and I was grateful. I expected Paul to start making noise about the inheritance. And sure enough, he showed up at our house. Don't worry, I've already decided about Dad's inheritance. I'm taking the money, and you can have that abandoned house. It's untouched, and we don't want that anyway. It seemed Paul had preemptively decided how to divide my father's estate. He probably didn't care about the land anymore. My sister-in-law, arriving with him, said with a full grin. You should be thankful even for a haunted house. That house looks like it could collapse at any moment. You better demolish it quickly before we get complaints from the neighbors. I was annoyed by my sister-in-law's sarcasm, especially since she had opposed selling the house when my father suggested it, but now urging us to demolish it. It seemed like Paul and his wife were inheriting the cash and leaving me the burden of the dilapidated family home. Angry at their absence at the funeral and their arbitrary decision about the inheritance, I was trembling with anger. Seeing this, they left, looking pleased. Don't be too upset. An inheritance requires a formal division agreement, so it won't just happen the way your brother said. Comforted by my husband, I decided to clean up the family home with him. Regardless of who would inherit, it needed to be done. When we went there, the place was even more run down than we expected. Is that safe in your father's room still unopened? Curious about the contents, I had brought the key my mother had given me long ago. With a nervous heart, I inserted the key, and with a loud noise, the safe opened. It was this key after all. Opening the door, we found only documents inside, leaving both my husband and me slightly disappointed. Imagine if there had been gold bars in here. Your brother and his wife would start another uproar. While my husband chuckled and looked through the documents, his expression suddenly turned serious. Noticing his change, I also looked at the documents and couldn't help but exclaim. I had never heard such a thing from my parents. I wonder if Paul even knows about this. Although my husband was initially shaken, he quickly smiled. If your brother knew about this, he wouldn't have decided on the inheritance on his own. He'd be shocked to see these documents. While my husband seemed amused, I was too shocked to smile sincerely. When we brought the documents home, my brother and his wife soon arrived in a flustered state. When I tried to withdraw Dad's savings at the bank, they said I needed a division agreement and a family registry. Let's prepare the division agreement quickly. My husband struggled to hold back his laughter as he responded to my flustered brother. We will prepare the division agreement, but you're not involved, right? After all, you're not his biological child. Paul and his wife were dumbfounded when they heard this. So I showed them the family registry that was in the safe. So, you were Mom's stepchild? I just found out myself. But since you weren't legally adopted by Dad, you don't have inheritance rights. Even as I explained, my brother and his sister-in-law stared at the documents, unable to grasp the reality. Watching him carefully read through the documents, I realized the meaning behind our father's words before he passed. Father's phrase, "It becomes hard to tell the truth," referred to the fact that my brother was not his biological son and had no inheritance rights. Paul finally seemed to understand as he silently stood there. However, not willing to give up, his wife exclaimed she would obtain a new copy of the family registry and stormed out. The family registry we had was old, and although it might have been updated, given my father's words, it was unlikely Paul was legally adopted. Unfortunately, it seems you can't inherit his estate. I wish he had told you. As I spoke softly, my husband showed me a letter that he had found in the safe. It was addressed to me from my mother, left in case of an emergency. It appeared that my father had intended to legally adopt Paul as a son. But since my father was wealthy, she opposed it. She felt sorry for letting Paul inherit as he wasn't her biological son, stating that just being raised as a true son was enough. She had tried several times to tell this to Paul but never did, and ended up writing the truth in the letter. She wanted me to tell Paul after she passed away and had entrusted me with the key. When I showed Paul the letter from our mother, he seemed to accept everything. Make sure you tell me important things. I thought I was going to inherit a lot and went on a spending spree. Hearing my brother's confession, my husband and I panicked. Apparently, they had splurged on cars and luxury goods, thinking he would inherit all of my father's savings. You might want to hurry and return those purchases, right? You don't have the money to pay for them, do you? My husband, who had been smiling moments ago, turned pale upon realizing the amount they had spent. I admired my husband's genuine concern even though it was not his direct problem. Chastised by my husband, Paul quickly left, and soon after, his wife returned. Oh, it turns out Paul really isn't your father's child. I thought we were going to inherit, so I secretly went into debt. Hearing her confession, my husband and I were at a loss for words. The distressed sister-in-law begged me for money, and I responded with restrained anger. I can't give money to someone who didn't even attend the funeral. It would upset my deceased parents. Desperate for money, she became aggressive. I won't be able to pay my rent if this continues. Just lend me the money quietly. Losing patience with her demanding tone, I retorted sarcastically. If you can't pay the rent, I could rent you the house you called a haunted house for cheap. With nothing to say in return, she left with a look of frustration. Paul tried to sell what he had bought, but couldn't recover the full amount, and the debt remained. My sister-in-law was also reprimanded for her secret debts. The large amount panicked Paul. They tried to ask relatives for help, but no one was willing to assist two people who hadn't even attended their parents' funeral. As my sister-in-law had feared, they couldn't pay the rent and were evicted from their rental home, now hopping between hostels. Surprisingly, despite their strained relationship, they hadn't divorced. No matter how hard they tried, the debt never seemed to decrease due to interest. Meanwhile, using the inheritance, I renovated our derelict family home and we started living there. Initially, I had considered selling it, but memories of my parents made me want to keep it. Our new home was much larger than the previous one, and our son enjoyed running around happily. My husband was also pleased with the move to a homeowner from a renter. And we all felt the move was for the best. The money I inherited allowed us to renovate it like a new house. But I kept the safe with my mother's letter inside. Keeping the safe made it feel like my parents were still with us, lessening the loneliness.
I am Sandra. A few weeks ago, my father, who had been ill, passed away. I wish I could have shown him his grandchild's face. As I sighed, those words escaped my lips. I got married when I was 25. That was exactly 5 years ago. I had made this promise with my father who attended my wedding. I'll tell you first when I get pregnant. However, that promise was never fulfilled. That's about the only regret I have regarding my father. Since my father's illness was discovered a year ago, I have tried to do everything I could for him. I regularly returned to my parents' house and visited the hospital with my mother. We also made phone calls and even video calls. Basically, I did everything I could think of. Still, it doesn't mean I don't have things to think about. I wonder if I could have done more. As I muttered this, my mother next to me said,
"It's okay, Sandra, you did well."
"Really?"
"Yes, I'm sure your father was pleased too."
As we were having this conversation, my sister Tracy finally came home. "I'm home. I brought the lawyer with me." Saying this, my sister entered the living room. Following her was a man in his mid-40s. I guessed this man must be the lawyer, and as I thought this, the man greeted.
"I have contacted you. I am Lawyer Brown." "Thank you for coming. Please come this way." "Then, if you'll excuse me."
Led by my mother, Lawyer Brown took a seat. Then almost immediately, my sister started saying, "I heard from this lawyer that there's quite a bit of inheritance from Dad." "You're not getting all of it, you know." "I know that." My sister glared at me angrily as she shouted. Naturally, I glared back. My sister and I have never been on good terms. It wasn't this bad in the past, but things turned sour quickly after my father's illness was discovered. A lot of it was due to my sister's arrogant attitude. Despite my many attempts to contact her, she never came to visit our father. Maybe my approach was too harsh at times. I was worried about our father and might have spoken too strongly, but my sister's response was just as stubborn. "We're not children, there's no need to be so stubborn." To which my sister retorted, "Huh? I'm not being stubborn. It's just not easy to come from the city." "This place is in the countryside, yes, but it's just an hour by train, right?" "That 1 hour is tough. It costs money, too." "Is money that important to you?" "It obviously is. I'm busy, so stop contacting me," she snapped at the end. No matter how far away she lived, she could have shown her face occasionally. That's what I always thought, and that's how our relationship quickly deteriorated. In the end, my sister never came to visit our father, so our relationship is still strained today. Sensing the tense atmosphere, the lawyer intervened.
"Please, calm down."
"Yes, I'm sorry." As I apologized, the lawyer nodded and continued.
"As I mentioned over the phone, I am in possession of your husband's will." "When did he?"
As my mother murmured, the lawyer said,
"It was a few weeks before he passed away. He requested it over the phone." "So you went to the hospital?" "Yes. Under the supervision of his primary physician, he wrote the will right in front of me."
It seems that my father had arranged for the doctor to contact the lawyer after he passed away. After my father's death, the primary physician contacted the lawyer. Following this, the lawyer contacted our family.
"And that's why I contacted you."
As he said this, the lawyer took out a white envelope. He placed it in front of us and said, "Here's the will." "That's definitely Dad's handwriting," I murmured as I confirmed the word will on the envelope. Meanwhile, my sister seemed impatient. Never mind that. Hurry up and tell us what it says. I'm busy.
Let's proceed then.
The lawyer smiled wryly as he opened the envelope. Inside was a single piece of paper. It read, Father's estate included the house, land, some savings, and a storage shed. We knew about the house and land, but what was this shed? As I pondered, my sister asked the lawyer, Hey, what about the farm?
The farm?
Yes, the farm Dad used to tend to as a hobby. During his life, my father ran a company in the next town. However, after turning 50, he began feeling the toll on his body.
I'm thinking of closing the company. I want to take it easy. Is that okay?
I heard this when I was in high school. My sister, who was in college at the time, objected, but my mother and I, thinking of Dad's health, agreed.
Tracy, don't worry about money. I have enough saved up.
Upon hearing this, my sister reluctantly agreed. Afterward, Dad really did close his company and started growing vegetables in a field near our house.
It feels good to move around growing vegetables.
Seeing Dad happy about it, I truly felt good about agreeing, but it seems my sister didn't feel the same. She said she would return home after graduating from college, but instead she got a job near her university. Eventually, she spontaneously married the CEO of an IT company she met at work. Setting that aside, Dad continued to work in his garden until he fell ill. Now my sister was claiming that the farm was part of the inheritance. The lawyer reviewed the documents after hearing my sister's claim. Soon he found a note and said,
The farm was rented.
Rented? I thought it was a large piece of land. My sister was visibly disappointed. Indeed, the farm where Dad grew vegetables was expansive, but it would be too much for us who knew nothing about farming. Maybe it was better that it was just rented. That's what I thought. As we discussed, the conversation shifted to the division of the inheritance.
As for the division of the estate, the house and land are to go to your mother.
My sister smirked at this. So we can split the rest as we like?
Please divide the savings and the storage shed fairly between you.
You mean cash by savings, right? I want the cash. How much is there?
The savings amount to about $100,000. With this amount, there's no need for inheritance tax.
Then I'll take the $100,000 in cash, my sister declared triumphantly, but there was no way I could agree with such a selfish proposal. I objected firmly. Wait a minute, I'm against that. Why? I'm the eldest. That has nothing to do with this. You can have the shed, that's fine. Wait, what's in the shed anyway? My sister turned to the lawyer who was flipping through the documents.
It's the shed next to the farm. You inherit the building, the land it sits on, and everything inside.
It comes with land? Her eyes lit up. Married to the CEO of an IT company, yet still hungry for more money? As I stood dumbfounded, the lawyer informed her.
It does come with land, but it's only about the size of 75 square feet.
What? 75 square feet?
Yes, here's a photo.
The lawyer placed photos of the shed on the table, showing both the interior and exterior. The exterior was just a shabby shack, clearly worn out. Inside there were only items like hose and garden scissors, nothing that seemed valuable. I don't want that. My sister's face twisted in displeasure. I peeked at the photos too, and it was all very ordinary stuff. I thought, they're just sentimental items, but they won't bring any money. As I was thinking, my sister said to me, Fine, I'll take the cash. You take that dirty shed. Wait a minute, that's not fair. You were the one who supported vegetable gardening. What are you complaining about now? It was hard to argue back. Yet if I didn't say anything, all of Dad's estate would end up with my sister. So we're agreed then. My sister pressed for confirmation. As I struggled to respond, my mother interjected.
If Tracy won't complain later, I won't object.
Why would I complain?
Then it's settled. Tracy takes the cash and Sandra gets the shed.
Okay, that's decided then. My sister smirked. Sensing something was off, I immediately objected. Wait, I haven't agreed to this. Huh? Just give it up. But... Do you really want money that badly? You're so greedy. It's not like that, but... You really are tedious. Isn't Dad more important to you than money? That left me speechless. Of course, family is more important than money, but certainly money is important too. It shouldn't be compared with family. As I was lost in thought, my sister quickly concluded the discussion. In the end, the division was decided. My mother received the house and land, and my sister received Dad's savings. All that was left for me was the dirty shed. Afterwards, my sister signed a document stating she would not complain about the inheritance division and left with a loud laugh. I, on the other hand, was full of dissatisfaction. I, voicing her frustrations to my mother, asked, "Mom, why didn't you help me?"
"Oh, I did help you."
"How? You just sided with Tracy."
"That's not true. I made sure you got the shed."
"Huh? I'm not happy about getting that old shed." Mother, smiling, suggested,
"You might find it surprisingly nice if you go there."
I could only puff out my cheeks in response. The next day, I took the key I got from the lawyer and headed to the shed near the farm. It was just a few minutes' walk from the house, a rural road with no one else around. Eventually, I reached the farm that my father had rented. He had been hospitalized all year, so the farm was barren. I glanced at the empty farm as I unlocked the shed. Wow, the dust. The shed was quite dusty because it hadn't been cleaned. Still, I thought there might be some of my father's keepsakes inside, and began searching the shed. Nothing special here. It was just a dirty old shed. All I found were the tools my father used for gardening. They could be considered keepsakes, but they weren't anything significant. Maybe I should just take these things home for now. As I murmured this, I looked around the shed and noticed something. Huh? It seemed smaller inside than it looked from inside. Maybe it was just the dim light, but the shed felt a bit cramped. Is it just my imagination? Thinking this, I stepped outside, but the feeling of discrepancy persisted. After some thought, I decided to check around the back of the shed. The back was bordered by a forest of dense trees. Looking there, I was surprised to see a door on the back side as well. Huh? A back entrance too. Saying this, I had a sudden realization. From inside the shed, I saw only a wall. That meant there was only one entrance, but from the back side, there was clearly another door. What does this mean? I pondered. Normally, you should be able to see this door from inside as well. However, it wasn't visible from inside the shed. If that was the case, it meant there was a wall in between. In other words, there was a space that could only be entered from the back. The moment I realized this, I got excited. I thought, this must be a surprise set up by Dad. My father always loved surprises. He used to surprise me on my birthdays as well. Flooded with such memories, I found myself in tears. I quickly went back inside the shed and began searching for the back door key. If it were my father, he surely would have hidden it somewhere in the shed. With something akin to certainty, I rummaged through the shed. After a while, I discovered 2 keys hidden in the handle of a shovel. Going back to the back side, I inserted one of them into the door. With a click, the door opened. I thought, I wonder what's inside. Inside was indeed a very narrow space. It was only a few dozen inches wide. There stood a large safe, all alone. This one? Of Dad's company? I recognized the safe. It was the one that had been in the corner of the president's office when I visited my father's company as a child. How nostalgic. I rushed to the safe, a tangible memory of my father. My heart swelled with emotion. This alone was worth a significant part of the inheritance, but knowing my father, this wouldn't be the end. There must be more surprises. As I murmured, I inserted the other key into the safe. With a slightly rusty sound, the safe opened. What? No way! The moment I saw the contents, I gasped. Inside was an unexpected inheritance. What should I do? Oh, right. I need to tell Mom. I locked the safe and hurried to where my mother was. After explaining the situation to her, I called my husband. With his help, we transported the safe to my parents' house. That's when I realized the contents of the safe were undoubtedly my father's. However, including the shed in my inheritance might mean I'd have to pay inheritance tax. I better get this checked out properly. The contents of the safe were clearly valuable at first glance. After some thought, I decided to consult Lawyer Brown.
Inheritance tax, you say? In that case,
according to the lawyer, it would be better to consult a tax accountant for inheritance tax. He arranged for me to meet a tax accountant he knew. I left the complicated matters to the tax accountant. As time passed, about half a year went by. Just as I thought things were settling down, my sister came to my house, which was near our parents' home. What brings you here all of a sudden?
Yeah. I had some business at our parents' house.
Did you stop by on your way?
Something like that.
My sister's behavior was odd. It didn't add up. Even though we lived close to our parents' house, it took a good 10 minutes by car to reach the house I shared with my husband. Our relationship has soured over our father's situation. Just stopping by isn't something we would normally do. I couldn't shake off my suspicion as I watched her. Despite her nervous behavior, Tracy asked,
Can I come in?
Sure, but do you need something?
I need to talk.
She forced a smile and said that. Reluctantly, I let her into my house. After I served some coffee, she started fidgeting and blurted out,
I have to ask directly. Did you win the lottery or something?
Huh? No, I haven't.
Then did your husband get a bonus?
I tilted my head. I don't buy lottery tickets because I'm not interested in them. Moreover, while my husband does receive bonuses in the summer and winter, it's rare to get one at this time of year. What was she talking about? Confused, I decided to ask her directly. What are you talking about? Suddenly, Tracy burst out angrily.
Huh? Are you making fun of me?
What? What do you mean?
Money, Sandra, money. You have it, don't you?
Money? What about it?
Yes, I heard about it.
My sister began to speak excitedly, recounting a story from a few days earlier. Living in the city, Tracy had randomly encountered a female relative from our mother's side while downtown. This relative, upon seeing Tracy, started this conversation.
It must have been hard with your father.
Yes, well...
I visited him several times to pay my respects.
Is that so? Thank you.
But really, was it right to receive such a gift?
A gift?
Yes, didn't your sister send gift vouchers? Worth several $100s?
Gift vouchers?
This was how the conversation went. Understandably, what caught my sister's attention were the gift vouchers. Hearing that I had sent them, Tracy assumed I had come into some unexpected money.
You must have come into some money. Tell me.
My sister pressed me, and I sighed in resignation. Then, sensing my attitude, Tracy snapped.
What's with that attitude? Are you mocking me?
No, it was just a sigh.
So where did the money come from? That's what I want to know.
Where? From the inheritance, remember?
Inheritance?
Yes, after we've received the inheritance, I sent the vouchers to the relatives who had helped us. I explained this, and Tracy frowned.
But all you got was that dirty shed.
That's right.
And there's no way that shed could sell for any real money.
But there was a safe inside. That's where the real inheritance was.
What? A safe? Real inheritance?
Since Tracy looked baffled, I patiently explained. Inside the shed's safe were watches. They were all expensive pieces, collected by my father as a hobby during his lifetime. However, I wasn't sure of their exact value. On the other hand, the remaining cash from the estate was about $100,000. Considering he had been an early retiree as a business owner, this amount seemed modest. This indicated he might have invested a significant amount in those watches.
If they're high value, you'll have to pay inheritance tax.
After seeing what was in the safe, that's what my mother said. What should I do, Mom? After thinking it over, she advised.
These things always come out. You should file it properly.
How?
Well, let's ask that lawyer we talked to last time.
Thus, I consulted Lawyer Brown. He informed me that the inheritance tax would be based on the current value of the valuable items. He also recommended that I consult a tax accountant, whom he could refer. I left everything in the hands of this accountant. Eventually, it was discovered that the watches alone were worth several hundreds of thousands of dollars.
With watches this valuable, you'll need to pay inheritance tax.
How can I afford that? He suggested.
Why not keep the pieces you're emotionally attached to and sell the rest?
Indeed, as someone who didn't understand their full value, there was no point in me keeping such expensive watches. I preferred them to be with someone who appreciated their worth. With that thought, I ended up selling several of the watches. With the money from selling the watches, I paid the inheritance tax and used the remainder to the relatives who had helped us. Those took the form of gift vouchers. Among the items I kept was the pocket watch my father often wore. I shared this story with my sister while showing her the watch. It's not expensive, but it holds the most memories for me. However, upon hearing my story, my sister frowned and asked,
What? There's nothing left?
No, there are a few left in the safe.
Where's the safe?
It's at Mom's place. It was too heavy to move here from the company. My sister's expression turned contemplative, and I sensed a flicker of unease. But then she abruptly stood up and said,
I'm leaving, now that I know where the money came from,
and left. Given my sister's greedy nature, I thought she might demand some of the money from the sale of the watches. Well, at least she left without making a scene. I was relieved. However, I should have remembered that my sister isn't usually so understanding. That slipped my mind until later that night when I got a call from my mother.
It's urgent, Sandra. Please come over right away.
What's wrong, Mom?
Just hurry, it's serious.
Panicked, I rushed over with my husband. As we neared the house, I noticed something unusual. The area around the house was illuminated in red. What's going on? It became clear as we got closer. Several police cars were stationed around the house. I made my way through the crowd of onlookers to speak with my mother. What happened, Mom?
Oh, Sandra, you see...
She explained that around 9 p.m., feeling tired, she had gone to bed early. Soon after, she was disturbed by strange noises, the sound of someone rummaging through things, thumping and bumping around. Mother thought,
It must be a burglar.
She thought it was a burglar. Being alone, she felt powerless and decided to flee through a window. As she looked back, she could see the beam of a flashlight moving inside the house. Convinced it was a burglar, she ran to the neighbor's house and exclaimed,
Help! There's a burglar!
The neighbor, hearing this, immediately came out. They noticed a flickering light where my mother pointed. Naturally, the neighbor thought it was a burglar too and called the police. But it turned out not to be a burglar at all. It was just my sister sneaking around inside the house. Hearing my earlier story, my sister has secretly gone to search the safe. Of course, neither my mother nor the neighbor knew this. Soon, the police arrived due to the supposed emergency. However, the arrival of the police startled my sister. Thinking,
I need to get out of here.
She panicked. In her haste to escape, she bumped into the open safe door. Unfortunately, the safe, destabilized by the impact, tipped over toward my sister as she tried to flee, trapping her beneath it. So did my sister end up pinned under it?
That's right.
Really? Is she okay?
She was taken to the hospital by ambulance, but she keeps saying her leg hurts.
What was she thinking? I was truly exasperated. Later, both my mother and I explained it to the police officers who arrived to help. Moreover, since my sister was injured, I reluctantly called her husband late at night, to which he exclaimed,
What? She sneaked into her childhood home?
Yes, that's what happened.
What is she doing? She doesn't even do any housework.
I'm really sorry about my sister.
Never mind, I'm going to divorce her now.
Divorce?
Actually...
According to her husband, my sister had accumulated a considerable amount of debt. It seems she had been spending lavishly on luxury items. This came to light during a severe argument they just had. The last thing my sister said before storming out was,
I'll borrow from Mom and pay it back.
Apparently, the $100,000 my sister received as inheritance had also been poured into paying off her debts. Still not enough, she came to me hoping to demand more money only to find out about the contents of the safe. It's no wonder her husband was furious. Eventually, with a fractured leg, my sister remained in the hospital where her husband approached her to initiate divorce proceedings. Naturally, she made a big fuss.
I won't get divorced. Absolutely not.
But it was too late. Her husband had an application of the divorce papers. Presented with the papers, she had no choice. Now my sister lies bewildered in her hospital bed. Next to her, there's a magazine with part-time job ads, likely planning to start working to pay off her debts. For me, that's preferable. As for me, after the commotion, I decided to move back home. Of course, I'm worried about my mother, but there's another reason. I'm pregnant. After discussing with my husband, we planned for me to have a hometown childbirth at my parents' house. Though I wished my father was alive to hear the news of my pregnancy, I'm sure he would be delighted. So now I'm looking forward to giving birth to a healthy baby.